Welcome to Glazed Over,
a podcast for business tips, painting tricks, and gathering with friends.
We're your hosts, Amy Williams
and Christine Steele, and we're so glad you're here.
Hey, Christine.
Hi, Amy. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fabulous. I just spent about 45 minutes playing with my plants. It's raining, so I took them outside, enjoyed the summer rain myself, highly enjoyed it, and now look like a drowned rat, but, living the best life.
Well, you look great. You look great.
Thanks.
That's excellent news. Yeah, my studio's like kind of in disaster zone. I've been off for almost a full week for my birthday, and that's a national holiday in my opinion. Yes. So I'm kind of just slowly getting back into work, and it's crazy over here. I am so looking forward to the chat we're about to have today. We have a new friend, at least for me, a new friend on the podcast today, and we're going to be discussing firing. And I wish I knew about her about a year ago, so I could call her and say, help me through this. But that's all right, because now we're going to learn a lot. Jessica Cowan.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. Similarly, having storms on storms on storms. So enjoying the influx of business that comes along with that.
Yes.
There you go. But that's so exciting. You're in Chattanooga, which is close to me, not that close to Christine. So I'll have to come visit. I've got friends that live on Signal Mountain. So I'll just pop in.
Yeah. I've met some of your friends whose name I don't remember, but they were looking for your pieces in the store. And I love that lemon juicer and the handful base. Those are top sellers for me.
Love to hear that. Is everyone listening? Yeah.
I know. Yeah. So if you are wondering what you should get, you should go get some Amy Y'all Bisque right now.
Absolutely.
Jessica, we've got you on the podcast today to talk about firing, a really kind of dreaded topic, I think, in a small business world, because it's not fun and it's uncomfortable. And I feel like you're either really good at it or really bad at it and kind of nowhere in between. And when Dina and the team were discussing, who can we have to talk about this sensitive topic, she says, well, Jessica used to work at Chick-fil-A. And we all said, oh, because I definitely have the idea that Chick-fil-A has it together in terms of like employee standards and practices. And so I am just so curious to kind of get your insights on everything from what you've learned there and then what you've learned from running your own studio. But let me stop talking and let you introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, my name is Jessica Cowan. I am a memory maker, a fun facilitator, and a community builder. I currently own a studio in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We've been open for 11 years. I've been the manager for 10 of those years and the owner for the past 5. Prior to this, I also was a manager for a couple of Painting with the Twist locations. I worked under Teresa Johnson. Before that, I was a partner in a frozen yogurt shop franchise. And before that, I was management at Chick-fil-A.
Nice.
I kind of love your life.
I know.
Thank you.
To be honest,
I love fun things only fun.
I love that.
I'm like trying to do the math here, and like you just kind of don't seem very old. So you've lived a lot in your youth, your youthfulness.
It is true. I am 32. I did start working the day that I turned 16. I've had a full-time job for entirely since then. And when I was a manager at Painting with a Twist, I was also working for the pottery place. So I typically have had jobs on top of each other and then in transition, multiple jobs. So I like to do things. Mostly I like to bring opportunities to people. So whatever I can do to be involved in the community, to become a pillar. Luckily, fun things. People love fun things. So I don't sell insurance. Thank God for that. Everyone is always excited to see me, and they always have been. Oh my God, it's the Chick-fil-A girl. Oh my God, it's the yogurt girl. Oh my God, it's the pottery girl. So I love that in my life. When I told my staff that I was going to do this interview on firing, they were like, that is so not fun. That is the opposite of the thing that you want to talk about. However, being a business owner is not always fun stuff. So I definitely think this is an appropriate conversation that everyone needs to be having and thinking about.
So why do you think firing is so hard?
Well, I mean, one, most of us are really kind-hearted people, so it's hard to go into it knowing that, one, you're going to have a confrontation. That kind of sucks unless you just like confrontation for whatever reason, but I meet very few people who actually do. 2, there's probably going to be some emotional chargedness to it coming from both you and the person who you plan to terminate. So you do have to be prepared to mitigate your own emotions while also managing theirs, because they can cause a lot of damage on the way out. Literally in that moment, they can do something like strip naked in the parking lot and set their uniform on fire. They can decide to break some pottery on the way out the door, but they can also have, ramifications down the line. They can hop on a Google review and start, talking bad about you right then and there if they really wanted to. Thankfully, that's never happened to me. But there's a lot going into it. So you do have to be careful and make sure that you're going to come out of it on the same page.
I think it also requires a level of organization. Like, I think for you to feel confident in firing someone, you have to have all your ducks in a row of like why you're doing it. And I think it's hard. I mean, I'm definitely speaking for myself here. It's hard for me to always be that organized in my thoughts and in my citations and, the conversations that you have to have with them before it leads to the firing. Like, I can't remember who told me this, but your employees should never be surprised that they're being fired is some advice I got early on. And it's something that I definitely think about a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I also would say that your other employees are not going to be surprised that you're firing
Oh,
someone
yeah, that's
either.
so true.
So that is something that I know we'll get into that later, but it's like they're probably excited that you are cutting the fat and they're going to be willing to pick up the slack so that we can find somebody that does fit on the team, that is with the vision, that wants to move things forward.
That's so true.
I think the hardest thing is figuring out like on why you want to fire them. Is it a personal that you're just not vibing? Is it they're not doing work? It's always hard to find out what is the leading source and kind of sit with yourself as the owner. Why do you want to do that? I love mental health, and sometimes though my personality just doesn't fit with somebody else's. So it's always hard to take your heart out of your business and do the things that you need to.
Yeah, I think it's also hard when we're small and like maybe the team is small and you're like, how I can't let this person go because then I'm going to have to work more or it's going to put stress on the team. It's all very complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Definitely as an independent owner who maybe doesn't have a larger support staff to step in, where you are going to have to be the one that picks up the slack. So when you make this decision, you know that you're working 6-7 days a week until you find somebody to fill in. It's a lot easier when you have a leadership team around you who their responsibility is to fill in as well so that you can make those decisions and start moving things forward. It is so much harder when it is just you to also work and find a person and train them. And then what if it doesn't work out in the end and you're having to start all over? And you do have to make that call like every single time. Like, gosh, I just worked for 30 days straight and trained this person and it's just not working out. But it's always going to be better to fire fast, in my opinion, and hire slow.
So true. And I think we occasionally get too close to the situation, right? It's for reasons that we just mentioned. And maybe some of us need to hear some red flags in an employee or an outside opinion on what is considered fireable traits in a current employee. What do you think about that?
Well, everyone who works for me knows that there are 3 things that are going to get you fired off the bat, no questions asked. The first one is if you can't get the store open by 12 noon and you cannot make sure that someone else can get the store open by 12 noon, you will not have a job the following day. If I walk into the studio and you are painting personal pottery, you will not have a job the following day. If you are stealing from me, I will let you go, even if it is Christmas Eve. So yes, but I've done that before. So those are the 3 things for me that are point blank no-goes whenever you start to work for me. And everybody knows it. Like, this is how it is. Otherwise, I'm very chill. I want to help you. I want to identify the problems. I will tell some stories about times that I have been lifted up whenever I maybe otherwise should have been cut. So I definitely understand that once you're in it, you have to say, okay, what do I need to know about this person to help them be the best that they can be? I can't just say, well, this isn't working. You've got to go. You've got to have conversations with people. And so it normally starts with the disinterest and disengagement in the job. And before you notice it, you'll probably hear it from the other people who actually work with that person. They are going to be desperate to tell you, like, hey, I've had to do X, Y, and Z for the past 3 shifts that I've came in. I didn't know that I was going to have to wash all of the dishes from the shift before me. Can we do something about that? And it will just slowly snowball until every day you've got somebody coming to you, oh, new employee A did not do X, Y, and Z. And now I'm having to do X, Y, and Z. So that's a red flag when other people are telling you what they're not doing or that they've had an increase in workload when you've specifically hired someone to alleviate that increase in workload. Then you'll have that conversation with the person of like, hey, I just want to make sure that you understand that these are your job responsibilities. This is the role that we've hired you for. Let's write that down in our coaching log. Let's get better at it. And the next thing that you'll see is they're still disengaged. Like, okay, you know that you need to wash the brushes, and yet all of the brushes are still halfway washed. There's paint all over the bristles or right at the ferrule. So now we're going to learn how to wash the brushes together all over again. But you can only do that so many times. And so seeing whether or not they're being receptive to the feedback and the training is going to be like your third red flag that's flying up. So, okay, people are telling me you're not doing your job. I'm addressing that. I'm giving you the training. I'm taking time out of my day to come and give you the training. You're just not being receptive to it because you don't want to be here. And so then that conversation goes very much like that. Me and Stacy Sparrow Murphy, we actually had this conversation at the last convention because she is maybe somebody who will appreciate this particular episode. Because, like, this is my business. This is the thing that I have built. It did not take a day for me to build it, but it can certainly be torn down in a day. So we need to figure out whether or not you want to be here, because I'm not making anyone work. What I do have is a job in a fun and supportive environment with growth opportunities. And you need a job in a fun and supportive environment with growth opportunities. If we can come together, we've got a deal. If we can't, you're just going to have to find something else and you're not a good fit. And figure that out as fast as you possibly can with people. Don't drag it on and on and on so that at Christmas time, you still have somebody who's not willing to jump in and who is dragging ass and complaining the entire time about the fact that it's busy and it's Christmas and this is how we all make our money. Yeah, I know, right? It brings everybody else down,
Right, of course, yeah. Are you like a 3 strikes you're out kind of girl? I mean, you mentioned your coaching log. I definitely want to hear more about that. Is that kind of the number you will tolerate?
Yeah, pretty much.
Where are you at with this, Christine?
I'm not good at it. I'm just not. Like, that's why I'm kind of keeping quiet, because I am really bad at it. I always, back to that mental health thing, I always am like, okay, they need a job. There's this. And I'm like, I'm going to work a little bit more with them. I also have to completely admit that I'm very much the quiet fire. I will start kind of cutting back some of the hours because, and I'll explain that here's the thing. If you can't do the things during a busy day, then you're going to put on a slower day. And I'm also, if you can't teach classes and you're not doing well with the customers, I'm going to put you on a different time. And then I kind of start cutting hours. And then that's usually, I'm not good at it at all. I like to have the, instead of firing them, I usually like have the conversation. How do you think this is going? And then they're like, yeah, I don't know if it's really for me. And I'm like, oh, good. We're on the same page. Like that's, yeah.
I don't know that firing is the right word, laid off one person, which we'll get into a little bit later because I would love Jessica's opinion on how I did it. But let's get back into the scenario of like, okay, we have this employee, they're not pulling their weight. We've had conversations, we've documented it in the coaching log. What else like legally do you have to think about? I know it's different for every state, but what do you consider before you fire someone to kind of protect yourself?
Yes, I'm definitely worried about workers' comp, always 100% of the time, and unemployment. So luckily, Tennessee, we are a at-will state. So if you're in a different state, then you have different rules and regulations that you need to look into. It's always going to be your best bet to cover your bases by writing everything down, start documenting things as soon as you possibly can. Have the person that you're documenting conversations with sign or initial that they have indeed had that conversation with you so that you have that backing later. I have, in a once upon a time world and not a pottery studio, when I was an owner in a different thing, we had to let someone go because she had blatantly lied about why she had left the job previously, which happened to be the store next door to us. So that was a little bit, their manager came over and was like, hey, I see that you have hired this person and let me tell you what's going on with them. And I was like, crazy, because they said all complete opposite. They lied point blank, period. And so this was maybe 2 days after we hired her. So it's like, hey, we're going to cut this short. There's no probationary period. Like the lying just is not going to fit for me. She does go directly to the state, which was Alabama. They call me, we go through an unemployment rigmarole, but I had already written all the stuff down. I had a statement from the previous owner. And that is something that is the lying is a fireable offense, especially going into a position. So there was no unemployment for her to collect or anything for her to get from that. So if you do end up in that situation, you could have an issue where like your rates are going to go up for insurance. So the more information that you have that you can submit, I think not everybody loves the government, but in my experience with the government, they are pretty impartial. Like they want to listen to both sides and see what's going on. And if you're the one who actually has the data and the resources and the written logs and the signs, and all they have is, yeah, they let me go, you're probably going to win that one. So can't stress enough how important it is to record and write this stuff and also keep it in a file. Like all of my employees do actually have a file. I print stuff out that I have emailed them and whatnot to put it in there. I do meet a lot of management that they know to keep the information, but they don't have a system for organizing it. So they might write down that they had the conversation, but they will never be able to find that file later. Right. And you're not writing it down for your health. Like you are doing it to protect yourself down the line. You're not really even doing it for the employee that's right in front of you. Like it is for you to protect yourself whenever you get there. So those are the things that I would say that you need to think about is like, what is going to happen to my insurance premiums? Am I going to owe extra money to somebody? And have I done anything legally outside of bounds? In Tennessee, generally, the answer is no.
Right.
And I think that's why it's really important to have those individual meetings once a month, because those are times for you to have conversations that you can say, hey, I just want to bring this up, and then have them sign it. And that right there is really good documentation, not just during a meeting as in like a group meeting, but a one-on-one can help you have those ammunitions that you can kind of bring towards the table too.
I would imagine the coaching log is different than the files that you're printing out and saving.
Right,
Is that true?
disciplinary, yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the coaching log?
So the coaching log is pretty simplistic. It is a written log. You could make one in a spreadsheet if you're a digital girly. But I feel like most people in our industry are hands-on and tactile, and more information gets across to them whenever we are physically writing it down and looking at it together. But that's just what I have found with the people that I work with. And so, yes, the coaching log itself, it is, the date that we are having a conversation, what it is that we are conversing about, what steps that we want to take to get better in the future, and then I sign it and they sign it. And this isn't always that, oh, you're doing something not great. This is just like, hey, here's where you're at. What can we do to be better? We're always trying to be better. Yes, we also have monthly meetings. We also have a staff meeting once a month. And I have a member on my staff whose role is to coordinate the customer experience. And so during that time, she will talk about what we could be doing better from the customer's eyes. And so this isn't even what I think, it's what the customers think. And we'll all say, okay, great. Well, the customers feel like we need to do a better job at keeping the paint bar decongested. So what can we do to mitigate that for them? Okay, we're all on the same page that we're going to rearrange the tables to create a better pathway for that. And then we do it and we write it down like, cool, that's what we're going to do. So there's lots of different scenarios like that where, again, it's not because, hey, you, Amy, are doing something wrong and you need to get better. It's like, hey, we're all in this together trying to create the best experience for the team. Now, on the flip side of that is the disciplinary log, which is more of the like, hey, this is straight up out of bounds. This is what I need to happen in the next 7, 10, 90 days. And if it doesn't, this is what's going to happen next. Please sign here.
Do they have access to either one of these documents, or like, do they have a copy? Like, what does that look like?
They do have access to it through me. They don't keep copies of it on their own. I mean, I would send them a copy if at any point that they would ask me to do that. But for the most part, they're happy for me to just keep up with that. And during their meetings, they'll look at their own files. I also we do a yearly review. I keep their forms in there. That also has a coaching component to it where it's like, hey, like here are the 3 things that we really need to work on to bump you to the next level. And then lastly, I'll mention that I operate on a values-based system. And so everyone who comes to work for me, a lot of people get personality tests, right? And so instead of doing personality tests, we do a values test. And I give them the 56 values that all the psychologists and sociologists have decided are important. And I have them rank their top 5 of those values. And then within those values, I can tell what they're going to be good at, what they're going to like to do, and what I need to be pouring into so that they feel like they are using their skills and interests to grow in their job. Because your employees don't want to stick around if they don't feel like they're getting some sort of investment back beyond the paycheck. Everyone thinks that, oh yeah, people just want to get paid and come to work and go to work and go home. And that's just not true. At the end of the day, like people do want to be involved. They want to be connected. They want to feel connected. They want to feel like they're using their skills to grow forward. So determining what those values are will also help you in coaching because you can kind of know what direction to go in. A lot of my employees currently have a value around belonging. It is very important to them that they feel like they belong inside of the studio. And you'll notice that to each other, they write like little words of affirmations and notes, and they let each other know how much they appreciate each other. It's one of my favorite things about them because I've never walked into that store without someone telling me, oh my gosh, so-and-so did this so fantastically today. I can't believe it. They are so uplifting and supporting of each other. They're always bringing little treats for each other. They get together outside of our designated times together because they do want to cultivate that feeling of belonging. And that translates into the larger overarching value of community that we hold, because when they feel like they belong in the studio, they're able to allow other people to feel like they belong in the studio. And that's where the customers come in and go, I love it here. I never want to leave. I feel like I'm one of the girls.
That's so beautiful. I'm absolutely going to be Googling that pretty soon. I do Instagram audits for any type of business, and I ask on there, like, what are your business values? Like, what are your brand values? Because I think that's so important. And the amount of pottery shops that don't have values themselves for their brand is always very interesting. And it's,
Yes.
you know,
Well,
I would imagine, you know, it takes a little bit of research, a little bit of digging, but once you know what that is for you, you can share it with your staff. And then that's when you start to get staff that really align with what you are looking for.
yeah, I mean, shameless plug. I don't know if this will come out before the convention, but that's what my whole class at convention is about, is using these values, identifying them, and using that to set the direction for your staff and for your studio.
That's awesome. There's no such thing as a shameless plug here. We
Oh,
do
yeah.
that. Yeah, we are
Absolutely.
so glad to have that. So let's say it's time to fire someone. Walk me through what that looks like for you.
Okay, well, when you are going to let someone go, if you know that this is going to happen, which you should, but not all, something could happen where you have to cut it right now and be like, you need to leave the door right now. But for the most part, you should know that this is about to happen. And you need a second person there to be the witness. That's not always super fun. It's helpful if it's somebody that's not super connected on the day to day. If you have like an admin person that you can bring in, I have some fellow business owners who are friends with me that I can bring in. You could also record the conversation, but you want this to be documented. You would preferably also want someone to be able to back you up, because this is really when the my word versus her word starts right here, because you should already have a bunch of written documentation about what's going to happen. And then you've gotten to this point. Now you could easily fall into the trap of having a verbal conversation without any sort of recording, or, like I said, just having somebody observing the situation that can vouch for you. So if you've got a camera, put it on camera, get your phone out, record it. But then you need to set a time, and you need to set a time that is going to happen. For me, I don't make people work their shift and then fire them at the end of their shift.
Yeah.
I know that that is popular for a lot of people to do. I don't consider that. I don't consider whether or not we're going into a weekend or how that's going to impact the day-to-day. The day-to-day is already going to be impacted by the fact that we're letting someone go. So that's going to happen. I'm not worried about it. What I am worried about is what's going to happen to the whole vibe of this current day and the people who are in the store right now. So you don't want to be firing someone like in the middle of the day while your customer's around and your staff is around. Set a time before hours or whenever people aren't going to be there to sit down with your second person and the person you're going to fire and have that conversation. Now, the very last person that I had to fire, as a matter of fact, tried to get around that by showing up before they thought I was going to be there. So I would also recommend be there an hour before. Be there an hour before you have set this meeting, because you will get people who will try to come in if they've got a key to your store and leave the key and get their paycheck if it's there, or do some damage or whatever it might be. So be there prior to the meeting happening so that you're aware whenever they walk in. There is no surprising you. Like, you're here to have that conversation, do something until they show up. When they show up, sit them down. The conversation, typically they know that this is happening. So most times that I've had to sit someone down to fire them, they immediately start crying. So the emotions start. I am, if you haven't noticed, like, although I can be very empathetic, I'm pretty stoic when it comes to having these conversations. Like, this, to me, it is what it is. I do want to be sensitive to people's emotional states and their needs and what's going on. But if we have gotten up to this place where I have to let you go, it's because my business is in danger. And that is my long-term career, my retirement. It's also the thing that is supporting other people who work for me and their families. And so this person can bring all of that down. So I'm not exactly worried about making sure that their hand gets held this entire time and that they walk out feeling like this was a great conversation. But I do understand that that's a really tough conversation to have. And so usually it'll go something like, hey, friend, I know that we have not seen eye to eye several times. Like, let's take a look at the timeline of since you worked here. So I hired you on October 1st, 2023. This happened. You worked for 90 days. We sat down. We had your probationary review. Here's what we were looking to work on. Then in the next 90 days, this is what happened. We didn't see any of those markers get hit. We haven't seen the improvement that we're looking for. And on top of that, here is the emotional issues that are happening within the store that is also impacting other people. Because I do think it's important to note to everyone that it's not just about them. It's not just about business. It's also about the people who work inside the store, who make the thing go on a day-to-day basis. Like, their needs are very, very important to me. If they are not happy, I cannot have the flexibility that I need in my life to create more opportunities for people. So if you're putting my staff in a position where they can't come to work happy, they can't deliver great service, they're stressed out whenever they get here, and you're the weakest link, you've got to go. And I really do hate that. I think that you're a fantastic and wonderful person. I would love to help you move into a position that does fit with your wants, needs, and desires. So if I can help you do that, let me know. But right now, what I'd like to do is trade you your key for a paycheck, right? So you go ahead and give me your key. I'll go ahead and give you this paycheck, and let's go ahead and walk on out the door. So I want my key, that day. And so that's really important to me. And I always have their paycheck ready to go so that we can go ahead and trade it. You're not getting that last paycheck from me until I have the key. You do sign paperwork about that whenever you get onboarded. Ideally, you'll leave in a just fine way and it won't be an issue. But, I want to make sure that I get that key back. If it means that I need to do an early payroll so that they get paid out and done, then I will do that as well. And you do want to just start walking them towards the door. So don't give them too much opportunity to go back and forth with you about it. Like, this isn't a discussion. This is a conversation, but it's not a discussion. It's not open for negotiation. So when you get up and you trade and you start walking them, they are going to follow you. They're going to be in a little bit of shock for a little while. So once you get them out the door, you're probably home clear for a little while. You will feel anxious. Your heart's going to be racing. There's definitely some personal emotions that you're going to be having around it as well. But do just remember that, you are doing the right thing for you and for your team. And if you need to close the door and then go and cry about it and, feeling like you're a terrible person, do that. I've had to do that before, where I'm like, gosh, that sucks. I hate that I had to be the person to take away the one opportunity that they have in life right now. But, this is what had to happen. So it is what it is. Occasionally, you might have people who you get them out the door and they linger around for a little while. Sometimes they're thinking about what they're going to come back in and tell you how it's going to be. And that's okay too. Let people say the thing that they're going to say. At this point, you've got to really control your own emotions and reactions, which anyone who knows me knows, and I'm about to tell you how it is. So this part is really hard for me to let people tell me how it is without me being like, oh, I know that they're not talking to me like this. So, let them tell you their little piece, because at the end of the day, they do have to leave. They're not going to come back. It is what it is. And you will feel bad about it, but then you'll start to feel relieved and you'll do the next work of okay, let's get the things covered. Let's start moving forward. And there will be a sigh of relief amongst your team of thank God that this person is gone so that we can get back to doing the work.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to call the cops?
I have not had to call the cops. Luckily, there is a bar next door to me. They do have a security officer who has come over before to walk a staff member out. So that has happened. But yeah, luckily, no.
I had to once.
How'd that go?
Not well. There was a employee that we had an event, and she, on Snapchat, she took a video that said she was outside telling me that she had anxiety attacks. So I was like, take a time to go outside, take a step out. But while she was out there, she recorded a video that said, someone bring me a something so I could something myself. And I, again, you're on your personal stuff. I wouldn't have known it, but then she brought it back into the studio, showed a customer because she thought it was funny. And I mean, the next day, it wasn't even the same day. And then I was like, I'm so sorry, but I'm letting you go. And then she put a note in the customer's car that said, thanks for getting me fired. She wouldn't leave. It was 2 hours later. I had to call the cops. It was pretty intense. That was the one that I was very firm on. No quiet firing. I'm like, you're done. I'm sorry. that one was the one where I was like, no, you're done. And then to a point where I told my landlord, this person's not allowed on the property. It's an experience though.
Well, and I mean, I think that's a really good point that you do have to have a plan B of what do we do if they don't go quietly. Calling the police, or if your building has a security officer, those things have to be in your back pocket. You've got to be willing to do it. You can't control if people are going to go crazy. Like I mentioned earlier, I've had people strip and set their uniform on fire in the parking lot. Could we have called the cops over that? Probably. But I mean, he got out his little whatever and he was done after that. Plus he was naked and had to drive home, so that's tough. That seems like a tough enough punishment on its own. So but yeah, I mean, that's the part that people don't want to talk about is whenever the people go crazy. I have had a couple years ago, I had someone that I let go, and maybe a month later, a little boy of a completely different everything from her comes in and gives me a book, and I'm like, weird. And it's a diary of her basically mental downfall since I fired her, and how she had to go into the psych ward and blah, blah, blah. And she just wanted me to know the impact that I had on her life. which I promptly
Wow.
threw away. Like, should I have called the police? And probably, yeah, probably. But, I was like, whatever, like, I'm just going to throw this away and move on with my life. So people will do things that you cannot even begin to fathom or imagine. And so having some sort of backup plan of like, what if something that I have no idea possibly could happen happens is a good idea. We have a taser and pepper spray in our store, which is not for people that we fire, but for any sort of security issue that we might have, it's just good to have something in your back pocket that says, hey, I'm not defenseless here. You're not going to just get to decide to go crazy and then we just have to take it. Like you get to either harm me or my inventory or my customers or whatever it is. Like, absolutely not. This ends here.
So Jessica, I kind of assume you are HR in your company. Or do you have someone that's HR? Like, do those responsibilities fall on you?
Yeah, no, I am currently HR. I will say that working for Teresa Johnson gave me a lot of very direct insight into that. She's pretty much the HR queen, and she is a great resource for me if I ever have any questions that are a little bit outside of bounds. I do also, I have a lawyer and I have other support networks. Our community in Chattanooga is very Southern, very small business oriented. So I can pretty much stand on the sidewalk and wave my hands around and someone will come and help me out if I've got some questions. But it is important to have someone that is designated and dedicated to being able to do that and have those conversations and make sure that all of your ducks are in a row, because you do also need someone who's going to do your payroll stuff to make sure your taxes get paid and X, Y, and Z. So I happen to, yes, do all of that stuff for myself, but you do not have to be the person who does it all for yourself. You can outsource for sure.
I'm lucky. My stepfather is a lawyer, so he is the one that when before I fired my first person, I was like, what do I need to do? And I was going to like have all the things. And he's like, wear it, fire at will. And I'm like, okay, I know you keep saying those words, but what does that mean for me? And he's like, if they walk in and their hair is blue instead of purple, you can fire them because you can tell them, like, it doesn't matter. Like you don't have to give them the reason. You can just tell them like, hey, I'm sorry, you're fired. And I first off was like, I don't think that's a good example at all, because I would be like, I'm jealous. Can you do my hair next? But it was an eye opener when he told me that you don't have to give a reason in Pennsylvania, but still having that backup paperwork is good because of the unemployment. I'm just bad at firing. That's all.
So let's assume that the firing went perfectly well and no one stripped in the parking lot and burned their uniform and no one slammed you on Google or TikTok. I'm seeing a lot of people take down employers on TikTok. It's quite scary. What are the steps after that? Do you talk to your staff in any certain way? Like what does it look like after you've let somebody go?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I do try to kind of build my exit interview into the terminating conversation, because my anticipation is that we're not going to see each other again after that conversation. Now, if you find yourself in a position where they're going to come back in 2 weeks and get their last check and they want to have that exit interview, you should do that. I personally have not met very many people who are in that state of mind whenever they're in the position of being fired. Like they typically also don't want to ever see you again. So go ahead and try to get whatever a conversation that you'd like to have or questions you'd like to have answered in that termination conversation. After that, you do have to address it with your team. It is a little bit heartless to not. They know that you had to let someone go. They also know that at some point their term will end either on good terms or bad. Like most people are not going to work for you for forever. So they do want to know that the leader that they've rallied behind is appropriately handling these situations and is being transparent with them about the conversations and how it goes. From a legal standpoint, like there are things that you need to not disclose and kind of keep to yourself, which is a lot of the details when it comes to people's personal identity stuff, all the ADA things, all the accessibility stuff, all of the potential mental health things, regular health things, etc. But you can definitely and should talk about, well, we had performance issues. Like we all have been on the same page about this, assuming that everything in the front end went well too. They all know that this person was on the outs. They all have contributed to your coaching of this person by telling you what it is that needs to change. So they are kind of wondering, well, what happened? Were you in control of the conversation, or did they just throw it all up and run out the door? And so I do say to my staff, hey, I want everyone to know that we have gotten to the point where I did have to terminate employee A. It is really unfortunate. I hate that for all of us, but I think that we all can agree that this is the right move, right? And then I will kind of list some very specific things to that person that everyone had brought up to me, and then give them an opportunity to say, like, do you have any questions? Is there anything that you'd like for me to clarify? Is there anything that you feel like we're not going to be able to bridge the gap for in terms of operations for the coming days or weeks? And now this is a good point for us to talk about when we hire the next person, what do we need to look for that is different on that initial hiring and probationary phase? And so my staff are part of why they feel so connected to the studio is because of that level of transparency that I offer them. And I do want them to also know that if it comes to the point that I've got to let them go and or the day that they decide to leave, that we're going to do that in as mature of a way and as nice of a way as possible. And I will continue to help you even if you flip me the bird on your way out. Like I will absolutely give you a honest and good review, but honest being the key word there, or help you move into a new position, because I don't want people to not be able to pay their bills or whatever it might be. But I also have to protect the people who work for us. And so I feel like my staff knows that they're the priority. And whenever we have to make cuts to the team, it is for their best interest. And therefore, they're excited about that.
I think it's so hard not to get down in the gutter and do a little like trash talking when you've been presented with this scenario, because it feels good, right? It feels good to be like, oh, we finally got rid of them. And remember when they did this and that, and
it does feel good, but you have to be so careful about that because it sets such a terrible example. And it starts to create that environment where they feel like they can start shit talking people before they've even gotten fired. Right. And then it becomes gossipy. And that is very hard to rein in once it gets started. Keeping everything professional and objective, but also not shying away from the like, this is what happened. These are the things that were not great about that person. And that is totally fine. And we need to leave it at that. If you want to talk about outside of work, you can talk about it outside of work, or you can come to me directly, but we're not going to gossip and complain to each other, and especially not to each other in front of customers. So that's kind of a big thing for me. Like, we do not need the customers knowing what's going on whenever our pants are down, you know?
Right. Right. I have, as I mentioned earlier, I have let go one employee in my business ownership, and it went okay, but I definitely could have done it a lot better. It all comes back to hiring, right? Like, I did not hire slow. I hired really quickly because I needed the help, and I hired someone that I had known from a young age. Like, I taught them at art camps and stuff, and then they became like 19 years old, and I was like, oh, cool, you can work here. And it was just really tough. And I was also having a lot of health issues at the time. I was like throwing my back out once a quarter from just stress. And I got to a point where I had to say to them, like, I took a cowardly way out. I'm going to be honest with y'all. I told them, like, I can either choose myself and my health, or I can continue to pay you, and I can't do both. And so I'm going to pick myself. But what really happened is like 4 things happened in a row that just made me absolutely crazy. And they would never learn from it. The last was that I was out of town for a conference, and I had 40 mugs that were shipped and ready to go that USPS was going to pick up. And I said, hey, before you leave, can you put all of these mugs by the door so the post office can get it? And they were like, yeah, no problem. And so then Monday I get a phone call from the post office that's like, your mugs aren't here. Or they didn't know it was mugs. They're like, your packages aren't here. And so I call my employee and I'm like, did you put the mugs by the door? Like, they would have had to barrel through the packages to leave the studio space. Like, and they go,
like, you chose not to.
Right. They go, I think I did. You think you did? And they're like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it past me to have forgotten.
Oh my
And
gosh.
the way my blood just boiled, that's my livelihood. Like, that's how they get paid. So anyway, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I was not very honest with them. I mean, I told them when they came in that day, I'm like, that's not okay. And now you've put us.
They're not listening to this.
They're not. They're not. And they know at this point.
I'm teasing.
It was frustrating. And I wish that I would have been more document forward in these times of like, hey, we talked about this. I mean, I have the emails and things, but they didn't try to file unemployment, or they didn't do anything like that, you know, so it was all okay, but it was a huge learning experience for me. So to hear you talk about like the coaching logs and the files and just being organized in that way to protect yourself, it's just so important.
Cannot stress it enough, even though I also went kicking and screaming having to actually do that part of the work and keep the files, because it's not fun, you know, like, it's not any fun, but it is really very necessary, and it's worth making the time to do it.
So how do you take care of yourself after you have gone through this process of firing someone and it being uncomfortable? And what do you do for self-care in that way?
Oh, yeah. Well, my favorite things to do are illegal in this state. So So I will find the way to be zen, become chill, meditate a little bit. Like I do suffer from anxiety. I've been diagnosed with it since I was 12 years old. So it's something I've lived my entire life with. It's not an easy conversation for me to have. And the aftermath is also not easy for me to manage. But I do make a point to regulate myself in some way, shape, or form. Usually, like a nature walk, getting some of that cortisol out is a great thing to do. Stay hydrated and just remove yourself from the environment. Like you probably don't want to be working that day or not like with the customers and everything. Like make it a work from home day, do some stuff on the computer or whatnot so that you can de-stress a little bit and not be playing the conversation just over and over and over in your head. Like at some point you've got to just move on, So I tried to do that for myself and just say, okay, now that I've done the hard things, I've talked to everybody about it, I'm going to remove myself from the situation. I very rarely can honestly take a day off without having to plan it. So it is I'm going to have to work from home today and put my effort somewhere else. Also, I don't want to be involved with the employees too much after we've had our conversation about what's happened. Like if you stick around all day, they're going to start asking you the questions of like, whoa, what happened? How'd the conversation actually go? And when you're a small business owner, you're very close to your employees. It's easy to blur that line of what is and isn't appropriate to talk about from an HR standpoint. So one of the biggest things I can do to protect myself from not falling into that trap is to just remove myself from the situation. And then like a long bath is always going to be a win for me at the very end of the day. So like as long as I can make it to the end and get that bathtub full of Epsom salt, we'll be all right.
What about you, Christine? You're our self-care queen.
I definitely remove myself from the studio. I call my best friend because she's my best friend and I don't want to talk to my employees about what happened. So she's probably heard me complain anyway about what was going on. And she works in a situation where she's a supervisor. So I definitely process with her and sometimes with my family. I also like to teach a class. I know it sounds silly, but I like to do it like a fun class. I'll be like, hey, pop-up thing, come do a pour paint or something that's like little effort, high reward, something that I can remind myself why I like the studio. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
And probably that you can trust yourself too, right? Like that's a good reminder. We've mentioned your Chick-fil-A pass. We've mentioned your Teresa Johnson pass. She's amazing. What kind of resources, if we don't have a Chick-fil-A and we don't have a Teresa, like, do you have any resources that we could learn from or that you would recommend for us to get kind of better at this topic other than this excellent podcast episode, of
Absolutely.
course?
Definitely re-listen to this podcast episode to start. I will say check your state website. They actually, or at least in Tennessee, our state website for small business support is actually very well done. There are lots of resources there that will at least help you know what the rules are from an HR standpoint and what you might need to know. Again, this Tennessee state website very specifically has like a little checklist of the onboarding and the letting people go so that you've got a pathway. Either way, like you're going to need to figure out to do the research. Your state website, I'm going to keep saying, is the best place to go because they know what the rules are for your state. But first, I would do some research, figure out what those rules are, have those written down. And then leadership books are going to be really helpful for learning how to have those conversations. Because the legal side, there's not a lot of help that you can get there outside of going to the state, going to an actual HR representative, or having been taught how to do this stuff. But 50% of this is definitely just emotional intelligence and knowing how to have these conversations and knowing when to start the documentation process and all of that stuff. So I love a good leadership book. I'm trying to think of.
I'm pretty sure at convention you gave me a sticker and a list of your favorite book. Is that right?
Yeah, the last convention I gave out bookmarks with my top 10 favorite leadership books on it. So if you've got one of those, you've got my top 10 favorite leadership books on there.
Didn't get one of those.
I know.
You didn't get one of those? Are you sure you didn't get one? I'm a little okay, I'll bring you one this year. I've got an extra one from last year, so I'll bring you for this year. But I would also plug Value Graphics some more. So Value Graphics is a book. It is a way of organizational management and leadership. And so I would look into Value Graphics and how that might impact the way that your leadership style might change over time, because I think that a lot of us just hate having these conversations so much that we haven't considered a world that, like, what if we didn't? Like, what if we were actually good at having these conversations, that it didn't give us anxiety for a week leading into it? So get good at having the conversations so that you can have them and so that you can teach other people how to have them. In the ideal world, you have somebody on a leadership team, a manager or an admin person who also wants to learn these things and grow into that role. So you're going to be able to have to teach them how to do these things and have those conversations.
Yeah. What if it were just a conversation and not scary and just facts? you have the support in front of you to back you up. Like that's a great way to think about it.
So do you have like a one-liner that you love to use? I know personally, I have 100% used the phrase, I think I would like to hire you back of just being a customer.
Oh Lord.
That's a pretty good one.
Bone.
That would cut me. Yeah, I am like, I feel very good for that myself. So
that's good, Christine.
Yeah, I mean, my firing conversations pretty much always end with, I think you're a fantastic person. I do not think that there's anything wrong with you. I want you to know that you're going to be very successful wherever you go. That's just not here. I want them to leave with a feeling of like, this was just a bad fit. However, if I'm pissed off, I will say, I'm simply not entertaining this anymore. That's my I'm pissed off line. I would like to trade you your paycheck for my key, and we're going to part ways. It's hard to get me to that point, but you get me that far, and I'm like, all right, I'm done. I'm not even going to play this game anymore.
I think we can't talk about firing without talking about hiring for just a second. I know it's kind of not what we asked you here just to talk about, but they go together, of course. Are there just some traits? You mentioned the value system, but are there other traits that you look for in your experience that you know have made a good employee for our industry in particular?
Yes, y'all aren't going to love this, but we have a little list on the back of our employment application that's check off the things that you would like to do here. Now, label the one you would like to do the most fun thing that you would like to do here. Anyone that has ever put number one as paint pottery samples has never been a good employee. Yes. So having that on your application of like, hey, like here's some things that we do here. Which of these things would you actually like to do? And out of those things, what would be your number one thing to do? They will tell you themselves that they think that they're getting a job to just sit down and paint pottery all day. Be looking for that. And then after that, the rest of them, they're all kind of like, okay, now we know if this person would be really good at parties, if this person would be really good at customer service, because we are looking for more customer service oriented people than we are creative people. The creativity is great, but we can teach people how to paint. We can teach people how to have an eye for that sort of stuff. We can give you the techniques. We can't teach you how to be nice. All of my staff members are knowledgeable, friendly, and happy to help. I can make you knowledgeable. I cannot make you friendly or happy to help. And that is something that I say inside of my interviews. So if you are just someone that you're going to roll your eyes at the door whenever it opens, this is already not going to be a great fit. And the other thing that I would look for is detail orientation. So, you know, that's something that in our businesses is very, very important. It can be detrimental to not have people who can look for the details and also look ahead a little bit. So when I start my interview process, I always mention that, like, I'm really looking for someone who's detail oriented, who knows to push in their chair. I make a point to say that at the beginning. When we get to the end of the interview and you haven't pushed in your chair, I know that you weren't listening, that you're not detail oriented, and that you probably don't care too much about the space around you either.
I love the checklist. That's such a brilliant idea. When I used to do the hiring, I would truly start the interview by saying, we're so glad to have you here. I just want to let you know, this is a customer service and a cleaning job. This is not an art job. And that really, you could see the look on their faces of just like, oh.
Yeah, I like to say that we're more like a restaurant for art. Like this is much more similar to waiting tables and turning a kitchen than it is to an art studio.
So true.
I always say we're waitresses with paint.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the great news about that, because when you get people who are coming from food, hospitality, service industry, they are, one, really good at the job, and two, thrilled to have it. This job is infinitely easier on their bodies and on their mental health than it was waiting tables for $2.25 an hour and dancing for tips. So, you know, those people are people that I look for specifically. The best employees that I've ever had are people that I've pulled directly out of other restaurants or hospitality industries specifically.
I want to encourage our audience to submit kind of their firing stories, because I think we're a community here of people of the same experiences, and we've been through this. And I think it is good to hear from others. So I do have in Chatter, when we post this episode again, I'll repost the Google Drive. So you can do it anonymously. But we'd love to hear from you, just to kind of hear about your best stories, your worst stories, your cringy stories like mine, your sad stories, you know, somebody burning their outfit in the parking lot. But Jessica, I wanted to ask, you know, you've shared some really good ones with us. Do you have another kind of maybe sillier firing story, or more encouraging, or, you know, a little wacky?
Well, you know what's funny is, for all of my expertise on firing, I really have not had to fire that many people. Most people take the coaching, and if they don't, they transition just fine out. But I will tell a secondary story for about the time that I almost got fired. So that might be that might be a good one. When I was working at Chick-fil-A in the way back times, I was a service manager, which was a new position at the time that was specifically oriented around the customer service experience. We were rolling out what is now called face-to-face. Back then it was called drive-through play. I was one of the very first people in the country to participate in that. So it was a really fun time. But at the time I was in high school and I was dual enrolled in college. And I also was in the marching band, twirling flags and swords. And so I had a lot going on while also running this full-time job. And my steam was definitely running low. And at the time, the general manager, his name was Josh Thompson, was really fantastic. All the people there were always really fantastic. I babysat his kids on Sunday nights so that they could do Bible study and whatnot. And so one Sunday night, I'm there babysitting so they can do Bible study. And he's like, hey, I know we're not at work. This is a little bit of a work conversation, though. Everyone has noticed that you are just not where you've been. And we want to help you with that because we know that you're fantastic. We know that you're a hard worker. We want to keep growing you. So we need to know what to do to help bring that energy back. And at the time I was having a lot of issues with my family life. And so I told him that. And the next day he showed up to my house, which we live in the deep south. So that's not too unusual. So he shows up to my house where me and him and my mom were all in my bedroom having this conversation. And he notices that my bed is like very sunken in. And he's like, hey, do you sleep on that bed? And I said, yeah, I do sleep on that bed. And so he pulls the covers back. And this is the same bed that I had been sleeping in since I was a very poor child living in a trailer where rats would eat inside of this mattress. And we had just brought it with us everywhere that we went. And now I'm in high school still sleeping on the same bed. And he pulls it up and he can see all the holes from all the rats. And he goes, you cannot sleep on this bed. The one thing I can do to positively impact your life is to get you a new bed. And he did. He left, went, came back, brought me a new bed, took the old one. And he was like, I might not be able to fix whatever is happening with you, but a big part of this is your mental health. You've got to start taking that seriously. You've got to start taking your rest seriously. And so here is a bed that you can sleep in and get some quality rest. And yes, the bed was fantastic and amazing. And I still have it to this day. The bigger point to be made was that people do care about you. They do want to invest in your happiness and they want to see you growing and flourishing. And so just because you're having a down moment, a down month, a down 6 months, that doesn't mean that you're at the bottom of the barrel and that you're at the end. So please be willing to talk to your employees and see what is going on with them and see if there is something that you can do to help, because you have way more of an impact than you can possibly imagine being a one-to-one person than you could possibly have being in a larger corporation where you don't even know the people who work for you.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. I think our industry also attracts the more sensitive, the more, I won't say troubled, but we get the people that need that extra attention, that need that extra hug, that need that extra focus on them. So that's beautiful. I got my best friend fired from Chick-fil-A. Anybody wants to hear that story? Yeah, she worked at a busy store and the manager was really not showing up in the way that he needed to be showing up. And it would be Saturdays where he would just like never come in and they'd be crazy and not have all the stuff that they needed. And so she called me one Saturday and said, I need you, like this crazy thing just happened, like a customer experience just happened, and I need you to write a review about it and like submit, to corporate that this thing happened and you can use his name and blah, blah, blah. And I love her. And so I'll do anything for her. So I wrote this, like, though the thing was real that happened, it didn't happen to me. And Chick-fil-A obviously did their due diligence. They like researched me, they researched her, they found that we were Facebook friends. And I think, to be honest, I mean, we were like 19. So I think she could have probably kind of stood up for herself a little bit more, but they brought her in to have a meeting and said, do you know Amy Williams? And she instantly cracked. I think she could just be like, yeah, she was here visiting me, but they felt like they had her and they absolutely fired her.
Oh my gosh.
Or that. So just don't write fake reviews, everybody. You think we wouldn't do that anymore, but I do find that it still happens. But yeah, whoops. Sorry, Paige.
I was just gonna say, I appreciate your brain. You have definitely given me some insight and I will do better. I promise. No more firing and be a little bit more forceful with it. So I appreciate all your knowledge and your stories too. So
this was a delight. I feel very encouraged. I mean, it's still just me. I do have a part-time person helping me, but it's going a lot better than it did last times. But if I have to fire her, now I know how.
Right.
It's funny.
But I won't, knock on wood. Jessica, thank you so much. Is there anything, where can we find you? Where can we kind of check out your socials for the shop?
Yeah, all of my things. So the potteryplacechattanooga.com, all of our socials, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok are also at the Pottery Place Chattanooga. What do you know? You can find me around. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook. Sometimes I'm on Instagram, but not very often. It's easier to actually find me in person. So maybe just like run into me in convention or come visit on the street and you'll find me on the street.
No, take her class. Take her class.
Yeah,
That's what
take
we
my
need.
class. Take my class. It'll be really fun. I promise.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see that.
Well, here's the secret. I've got envelopes that have wax seals on them because they're
Ooh.
top secret. So it's going to be fun,
Ooh. Very cool.
I can't wait for that. Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming. And thanks everyone for listening to another episode of the Glazed Over podcast. We're so thankful that you spend, an hour with us while you're loading the kiln or driving around or hopefully not firing an employee at the same time. And we will see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
Glazed Over is brought to you by the CCSA, the Contemporary Ceramic Studios Association. Thank you to our moderators, Amy Williams and Christine Steele. Intro and outro music by Scott Lester. Executive production by Louise Blazucki. Learn more about the CCSA at ccsaonline.com.